Welcome back to the channel. Some years ago, almost 10 years ago, I hosted a podcast called SCIFI on Screen. The podcast lasted about 5+ years, and I gently closed it down in order to transition into a YouTube channel talking more about books and movies. But I reviewed films one at a time, sometimes compared originals to remakes, sometimes I did special shows. But a lot of the criticisms and a lot of the critiques and analysis that I did for these films, I stand by. And so I thought, since I've done over about 100 shows, that I would share the archives with my new audience here on my YouTube channel. The shows range from about 45 minutes or so more of a podcast. I'll just put up a static image of the old logo, and you can listen and enjoy. I'm going to do these weekly, and hope you enjoy.
Welcome to another episode of Sci-Fi on Screen. I'm your host, Jeff Palermo, and this week I'm going to be talking about a little-known movie you may have heard of called Star Wars, or as it's known now as Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. This is probably the most daunting podcast I've done since I've started this podcast series. Even with Blade Runner 2001 under my belt, I feel quite inadequate in some ways. It's like talking about air in a way as a sci-fi fan, What the hell am I going to say about this movie? But I don't know. I felt like I wanted to take a crack at it, and I wanted to give it a rigorous look over, as I've been doing to all these other films that I've loved over the years. And it's been really fun just kind of going through them scene by scene and examining what I like and what I think works. And I want to kind of put Star Wars under the lens and see where it takes me. Here goes. I'm not going to go into too much background about Star Wars. Obviously, most of you listening know all about George and what happened in American Graffiti and Joseph Campbell and so on and so forth, and the legendary rights for the toys and all these wonderful things. I'm not going to talk too much about that. I'll talk a little bit about what George has done to Star Wars since the special editions came out. I'm not going to talk too much about this because, my Star Wars is the 1977 theatrical release with all of its flaws. I think still that I hope someday that Disney will remaster Blu-rays of all these. Although I heard something about the ownership is kind of sketchy, where I think Fox owns, all rights to Star Wars, the original film, in perpetuity of all formats, and like Disney might own Empire and Jedi, or George may have sold some of that to Disney. So like there's this weird break with the first Star Wars, and any sort of Blu-ray remastering, I guess, would have to be done with Fox's blessing. They'd ask for $1 gazillion, and Disney would probably say, why are we going to go through all this trouble to remaster these old versions that George doesn't even want remastered? As much as I hear rumors about this stuff, the truth of business and legal rights and all that stuff is very much real, and that's kind of the game. That stuff really dictates much of what happens in the world of big budget movies. So I still hold out hope, and I will be the first one to plunk down my money, however much they cost, if they remastered theatrical versions of Star Wars Empire and Jedi. It'd be awesome, but we shall see. It's kind of sad in a way that the film that kickstarted my imaginative life, in a way, has sort of lost to history, except for like obscenely high-priced used DVDs. I mean, you can get Star Wars, the theatrical cut, on DVD, but, it's like hundreds and hundreds of dollars now because everybody knows which ones they are, and they're priced out of the casual owner's market. And it's kind of sad in a way, like I rarely have the experience that something seminal to my childhood or my development is unavailable to me anymore, that it's been lost. So I don't know, it's kind of a sad note as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I guess I'm going to try to talk about what I think still works about Star Wars, because I don't, I can't really go back in time as a kid. I mean, when I was a kid, every bloody frame of the film sent me off on a journey, like it was so impossibly new and incredible and special and amazing. That reaction is, again, it's in my system now. It's in my body. It's in my life. It's in who I am in a way. And I can never go back there. So I'm going to have to review it as an adult, someone who's spent a lot of his adult life watching the descendants of Star Wars who have taken George's ideas and his style and all the things that he introduced in this movie and run with it, And in my opinion, because of the prequel films, at this point, better than George has done. Here we go. So there's the wonderful opening crawl. And, one thing I have to state beginning of this is John Williams' score for this film. I think in some ways, when I look at this film with a critical eye, I think with the wrong music or with dull, boring, or even non-symphonic music, that Star Wars kind of becomes a goofy B movie that was done in the 70s. Maybe the effects lifted out of that because who the hell saw stuff like that? But there's something about Williams' music that I think is integral to the presence of Star Wars and the power of it and why it works so well in so many ways. Williams' score in this film was really, in a sense, I got to give it to George because the 70s were the decade of the jazz score, the rock score. Things were like drums and horns, and everything was kind of electric and small combo based, in a way. You watch like the Dirty Harry films, you just hear these horns and the strings in the background. Lalo Schifrin was big back then, and to have these full-on symphonic scores, Jaws and Star Wars come roaring back into the public, they were very smart. And George was very smart in knowing, I think he knew what the impact was going to be by Williams' score, if it worked, obviously. Anyway, you get this magnificent opening film where you think you're about to witness the birth of the universe. It's so powerful. And you get the crawl and your wonderful camera shot, and you see Tatooine wonderfully bright in the frame. And then, of course, the Tantive 4, which is the rebel ship, goes by, and the Star Destroyer, man. It's supposedly called the Devastator, and it's Vader's flagship. It's an I-class Imperial Star Destroyer, if you're wondering. When I see it now as it rumbles overhead, and I just remember the insanity of it as a child, it's, again, the visuals, obviously, the crispness. I think what differentiates Star Wars so much from a lot of its counterparts is that the effects were so crisp and incredibly, in a way, like if you look at other 70s movies and their goofy special effects, Star Wars is almost like HD before HD. The crispness and starkness of the effects in space. But this time when I saw it, it was really like the sound that the Star Destroyer made. You had it coming overhead, but this incredible roar of it as it went overhead. It's just amazing. And the sound of the lasers, too. The sound design, again, along with Williams' music, the sound of Star Wars, all the different sounds that he brought in, and none of them are cheesy, and none of them, watching it now, nothing dates to me. The lasers don't date. Everything sounds still very powerful and very unique. Again, I think the sound design in this film is masterful. Masterful. So we see our lovely Tantive 4 takes a hit amidships, and then we get the white interior of the Tantive 4, which is kind of cool. George is interesting in that in the ships and in the Imperial Death Star, things are black and white. Very stark. The stormtroopers are white, Death Star mostly black, and Tatooine you have these dirty colors, and Millennium Falcon's dirty colors. But the bad guys, in a sense, and the ships of the ships of the Empire. And the Tantive 4 is ostensibly it's a diplomatic Empire ship. So the Empire ships are all very stark and clear and clean and black and white, right? I wonder if there's a subtle political overtone here when I think about, all the rebel stuff is dirty and messy, and it's, they're hiding and it's barely kept up and so on and so forth. But the good guys have all the clean black and white ships. It's very cool. Something I'm noticing as I watch it again. And then you have the 3PO and R2-D2, which is awesome, of course, and Anthony Daniels. And I'm always amazed that Kenny Baker was in R2-D2 the whole time. And then the waiting for the boarding party scene. Again, the sounds of the ships. You hear, they're directed to kind of look around and look above them, and you hear, these wonderful sounds of the Star Destroyer locking on to the Tantive 4. It's really cool. You see the face of the rebels, right? And in a way, unlike the stormtroopers, who I guess ostensibly in this film are still clones underneath, but they're faceless drones of the Empire. The rebels are like a cross section, and there are some old faces in the rebels, and they close in on a couple of older guys with gray hair. And I thought, I don't know, it's all really cool, because sometimes science fiction can be really the purview of the young in all areas, right? But Here we have the Rebel Alliance, and it's filled with a bunch of salty older dudes, I should say. I don't know, kind of like that when I look at it now. I'm like, yeah, pretty cool. The wonderful explosion they're in, the laser firefight, or the blaster fight, I should say, and the wonderful stormtroopers still works, I think. Somehow it still works. You know, the faces of the stormtroopers' helmets, maybe you could go one way or the other. They're very kind of garish a little bit, but I still think that kind of body armor still makes sense in a way. I don't think it's dated very much. Then you get 3PO and R2-D2 crossing that corridor with the beams passing in through them, right? And it's kind of cool because the beams kind of come right into the camera. Like you really get a sense of the shooting because you're right in there. Like the camera puts you right in the middle of it. Very cool. And then of course the swell of the soundtrack and Darth Vader arrives on the scene with his breathing. And interesting that, you know, in this first film, his helmet and armor are kind of matte black. Whereas from Empire on, I think they get very glossy and shiny. No wonder did that change, you know, like Vader sort of, you know, spruced up, as it were. And genius move to have James Earl Jones do the voice and, you know, David Prowse, the actor, be inhabiting the body. To me, you know, mostly in film, like masked figures who spend a lot of time on screen and who have dialogue really don't work very well. You don't see it very often, and I think there's a reason for it. When I saw V for Vendetta years back, I realized why it didn't work. That movie really encapsulated the fact that you hear this dialogue and you kind of see the mask moving a little bit, but there's something missing. There's a connection between the voice and the character that when you can't see a character's face, man, I think as a viewer, it's very difficult for it to have an impact. I mean, in Dark Knight Rises, they were smart because with Bane, you can see his eyes and you can kind of see some of his face. So when he speaks, even though you can't see his mouth move, and that is a big deal, you know, seeing a character's eyes are extremely important. However, what's done here is David Prowse does these motions, obviously the hand motions and the head motions that go and coincide with James Earl Jones's voice. Prowse had to kind of act the scene, and then Jones had to do the voice later, but the motions are still there. I don't know, it just works because there's a lot of physical motions by Vader. He doesn't just stand there talking for long periods of time. His hand comes up, he has a flourish, and he walks away. I don't know, for whatever reason, kind of against the grain, it works. So then we go to Leia, played by Carrie Fisher, obviously recording her Obi-Wan message to R2-D2. Of course, we don't know that at the moment. Then we have R2-D2 C-3PO to the escape pod. Again, you begin the bickering back and forth between them, although, you know, you can only understand 3PO, so who knows what R2 is saying. We get a sense of the Death Star plans because we hear Vader, the Death Star plans are not aboard this station, blah, blah, blah. No transmissions were made. And then we get Vader's first casualty where he lifts up the captain of the ship and crushes his neck because he didn't answer his questions. Vader's definitely a very bad boss. You know what I mean? Very bad boss. I will say that. So we get this language, consular ship, diplomatic mission. Then we have this moment where Leia, I think, shoots a stormtrooper and she's stunned. And so up to this moment, we've seen the lasers as these red kind of streaks. The stun is different. It's these sort of blue circles that emanate from the gun when it's on stun force, I guess, which is kind of cool, something different, you know. The pod ejection is done really cool. When the pod ejected, I really was reminded of the Apollo films of the certain stages of the Apollo rockets falling away. Very similar. There's a lot of debris. Very realistic. Again, you know, I'm stunned at how realistic a lot of the exterior space shots are in Star Wars and how they have not dated. And I will say that I think the special effects in the original Star Wars film have dated less than Empire and Jedi because Empire and Jedi started with CGI sort of cartoon ships and things just got really crazy with the sheer amount of ships or it became kind of a bunch of toys. But in Star Wars, man, for whatever reason, you know, especially the battle at the end, there's not thousands of ships always, you know, and whatever ships you do see and the pods and everything, they're very real. They're very tactile because they're models, you know, pre-CGI. And I think a well-shot model will outlast CGI of its day any day. And I always laugh the two guys watch the escape pod go. Like, there's no life forms aboard. Don't waste your firepower. Like, what if they have destroyed it? You know, I wonder if someone should do a comedy show like, you know, Star Wars ends right here. Like, oh, that's it. It's over. You know, no trilogy. They got blown up. Anyway, The pot falls towards the planet, which I love, and the clarity of Tatooine. Again, all of the space shots and planets are just so beautiful. And so we have Aaliyah Vader confrontation where, she's being questioned by Vader and she's denying, and of course he takes her prisoner. Carrie Fisher's English accent comes and goes in the film, mostly goes. Every once in a while it pops back in, and she has it, and then she doesn't have it. And then they take her away, and we get this plot with Vader and his minion. The Senate, once the Senate hears about it, it will generate sympathy in the Senate for the rebellion. So Vader basically is saying, transmit a message to her that all aboard were killed. The ship, had an accident or whatever. So there's this plot being hatched already to kind of, kidnap Leia, have her presumed dead, and they can pretty much dispose of her at will. Obviously, big plot moment, sending detachments, because they hear about the escape pods and, sending a detachment down to retrieve the droids, and down it goes. And so we get the first of our many screen wipes telling us that we are changing locations. We're on Tatooine next. And we get more bickering, 3PO and R2, and, they're in this desert. I love the skeleton of the Krayt Dragon, which I'm assuming is the Krayt Dragon, the same dragon that Kenobi imitates the call of later. Very cool because, just subtle touches that, you're not necessarily on Earth, as it were. So they bicker and they split up. We have this scene. It takes a little long. Actually, the one part about Star Wars as an adult now that I get a little bored by is it takes a while for R2 to get taken. He drives along a bit, and then he's finally stunned by the Jawas who come out of nowhere with their creepy little eye stalks and their hoods, It just takes a while. It's kind of boring, actually, by modern film standards. But we see the Jawas applying the restraining bolt, which is kind of cool because we don't know anything about that yet. Then this big sort of vacuum tube comes down, sucks R2 up, and he's inside. What I like about inside the transport is that I think it would have been easy to just have R2 and 3PO be the only droids in the film. But inside the transport are like dozens of other droids in various states of disrepair. They're broken. Some of them are weird looking. The droids are speaking other languages. It's all dirty and grimy. Now we're into like the dirty sci-fi, which George does both. Like each scenic design obviously reflects the culture that you're in. So now we're in backwater Tatooine, but it's still sci-fi. So there's all these droids there, and they're all dirty and grimy and oily, as it were. It's very cool. I mean, a great contrast from the Tantive 4, which was all slick black and white decks, and people in uniforms, and the Imperial, the all-white stormtroopers, and there's a lot of sameness in the Empire, in the Navy, obviously. And so here now you're kind of really grubbied up, as it were, and I really like that. And you're getting more of that this is a larger universe. There are other droids than C-3PO and R2, so they're part of like the norm in this new culture that we're seeing is that there are just droids. Droids are used as servants and workers and helpers in all parts of life. And it's a quick way in to see that R2 and 3PO are not that special in terms of them being droids. And I think it's very subtle. I don't think I noticed it until this passed through. It's very cool. I think it helps to place you inside this world casually without a lot of exposition. So then we do have a brief cut back. The stormtroopers have arrived at the crash site, and they found some droid, I guess, parts. Either it's 3PO or R2 kind of lost a few washers, as it were. You see, look, sir, droids, a brief cut, and then we get another screen wipe. And then we are at the Lars family compound, and we meet Luke Skywalker, played by Mark Hamill. And the house they live in is very cool. This time, really getting to look at it, this underground, sort of reminded me of like Bag End of the Shire. Like, of course, and it makes sense because you're out in the middle of a desert, which is extremely hot. You would build a house underground, and that it's sort of, it's done like this with these little cave-like openings into different rooms and places. Very cool. Very cool. So, we get the basic plot of the Jawas are basically droid dealers, and Aunt Beru wants a droid that speaks Bocce, and we get the notion that this is a moisture farmer. Like Lars is a moisture farmer, so the moisture evaporator, I guess, is the tech, as it were. And Lars is taking a look at them all, and Owen Lars, I should say, is taking a look at them all. And then we get Luke's horrible Tashi Station line, and it's Luke's first bad line, and it's given just with way too much. Like, I want to go into Tashi Station to pick up some power converters. And, Hamill, not the greatest of thespians. That is until he became the voice of the Joker in the Batman animated series, I will say that. But it's funny, and Star Wars fans, we joke about it a lot. And then we see another R2 unit, a red one this time. Owen buys 3PO in this red unit, and they're both coming towards them, and R2 tries to follow, and we see the restraining bolt in action. The Jawa sort of pulls a trigger on this little thing, and R2 stops in his tracks. The red unit explodes, and I never knew whether, maybe 3PO caused it to explode, like he sabotaged it, but I don't think so. I think it's just one of the deus ex machinas of Star Wars. Which just kind of happens. But, 3PO rescues him, which I think is great. And, there's so many great lines in this film. I think Star Wars has the best script of any of the Star Wars films because all the lines are consistently funny, or they're deep or pungent. They're just great lines. And, 3PO is like, why I stick my neck out for you is quite beyond my programming, and it's great. I mean, it's very funny. 3PO is, and R2 has these perfect little beeps, and, R2's beeps and the how they did it, how they came up with these beeps, where as a viewer, you instantly get little bits of mood from R2, when he's scared, when he's in that canyon and the Jawas are closing in, you hear these little, and you get a sense that R2's scared as a droid. And when he's chipper, he's very fast. And when he wants someone to know something, he has a bit of a vocabulary that you don't have to know. You can sense it because it's done kind of a very human way. Again, I think that's very clever and something that you don't have to spend too much time on, that's done so well and seamlessly that it just jumps out at you right as you're watching the film. So it's awesome. So Luke takes him into this little workroom, and he gives 3PO his oil bath, and he's playing with a T-16 Skyhopper, which is something he references at the very end of the film when he says to one of the rebel pilots, "I suppose I want brats on my T-16 back home. They're not much bigger than 2 meters." And this is his Skyhopper, very cool looking ship. And then we hear the throwaway line, "Biggs is right. I'm never going to get out of here." And his name is Biggs Darklighter. And a little bit of, what was not filmed, I guess, in Star Wars, but was in the novel because I read it. That's correct. Is that there's a little bit of a, Biggs is on Tatooine briefly and meeting up with Luke. And you get the sense that they grew up together. But Biggs has moved on into the galaxy, as it were, and is with the rebels. So we get wonderful Leia's message, the great soundtrack cue that precedes it. And, it's always like she's beautiful. The whole thing with, Luke and Leia eventually becoming siblings when you watch Star Wars is, I don't know, it's very uncomfortable for me. But probably I'm not alone there. But one cool thing is still hologram technology, very cool. And it's not a perfect hologram, right? It's not shiny and clean. And I'm sure George could have made it that way, but he made it slightly not perfectly focused. Even later on when they play the whole message, it's slightly out of focus, making it more realistic rather than if it was like this perfect crystalline hologram. There's something about sci-fi when it's too shiny, too clean, and too perfect. It just doesn't feel as real to a viewer, I think George fundamentally understood that, whether he maybe realized it or not going in. So we get Leia's little message, and we hear the name Obi-Wan Kenobi. And then, we get R2's little deception. Tells Luke if you take off the restraining bolt, Mary can play back the message, and then he completely goes mute. Very cool from R2. And then we have dinner table with Owen and Beru and Luke. When Luke mentions Obi-Wan, you see Owen. He looks very knowingly at Beru. Obviously knows who he is, and Wizard's just a crazy old man. And then we get this notion of Luke wanting to go to the academy and his uncle needing him on the farm. And they're back and forth, and, Luke feels trapped. And then he leaves, and and this is an interesting line. Now, with all the Star Wars that we've seen, right, we hear Beru say, he has too much of his father in him, Owen. He's just not a farmer. And Owen's like, that's what I'm afraid of. Does Owen know that, Anakin Skywalker became Vader? And, does he know it here? Because why would he hate his dad so much if he was this hero of the galaxy, who died? It's only one bit of Star Wars where I think maybe George did have some things in mind. And because part of me is sort of like the whole Luke and Leia thing here, being brother and sister, that came later. It just had to. All the kissing. She kisses him 3 times in the movie, for luck. And obviously there's the Han romance, but I don't know. So I'm on the fence about it. But when I hear this line now, man, it really takes on a whole new meaning. Owen knows that, Anakin turned out to be a pretty bad dude, and that's what he's afraid of. And he's trying to protect Luke from that. I don't know. It's a very interesting line. It's obviously I'm reading into it, having seen the sequels, which is not quite fair, but it's an interesting line nowadays. And then we get my favorite moment in the early part of the film where, Luke's kind of pissed that he's stuck on this farm and he goes outside and we see the two suns setting, and it's beautiful. Like, it's very well done. An incredibly realistic shot. Obviously, just two exposures of, our sun, slightly set apart. So it looks terrific. But then this John Williams cue comes in, and it's just, oof, I get goosebumps every time. And the subtle reminder that we are not on Earth with the two suns. Like, it's just so simple and so brief and so, like, I don't know. Really, to me, it's the first time. Obviously, the beginning seeing the ship really filled me with a lot of awe and grandeur. And then this kind of counterbalances that, and I really get a sense of like, wow, this is a deep film in some ways. I don't even know why yet, but it's hitting me on a lot of deep levels. So we get the wonderful morning after. R2 has escaped, heading towards Ben Kenobi, strangely knowing where he lives, but maybe not so strangely, having seen the sequels. Maybe that somehow that information is known to him, but maybe he's scanned. Who knows? I love the line where it looks like that little droid's going to get me into a lot of trouble. 3PO goes, "Oh, he excels at that, sir." 3PO's got some zingers in this one. It's awesome. Then you have the land speeder, and the land speeder is great, man. The land speeder is so tactile. It looks great. The effects of it from afar really work. Very simple. It's just, hovering over the ground. But when you get close, man, it's all beat up and dinged and paint's peeling. And again, it's future tech that's weathered and it looks great. And it's just very simple, cool design, 3 jets that move it around. Very cool. Then we get a quick foreground of some Tusken Raiders. One of them takes aim at the land speeder, but his buddy pulls him back. We see a first shot of the Bantha. Now, I may, because now all it's really available to me are the special editions, trying to kind of just do this on the original. So I may, if I get a fewer things of like, there was no Bantha in that shot, or there wasn't this happening, it's because I have to watch the special editions, which kind of sucks. But so I apologize in advance for people who know this movie scene by scene, and please forgive my errors as I make them. So I love the scene where he's looking through the glasses at a distance, and they see the two Banthas there, which are very cool. And then obviously, the Tusken Raider looming up in front of Luke. And what's interesting here that happens is the Luke versus the Tusken Raider, which is very odd if you think about it, is that you see the beginning of the fight, and then you cut to Luke being out. Luke backs up, the Raider's up, and the last shot you see of the Tusken Raider is him yelling. You see him raising his gaffy stick. That's right. It's called a gaffy stick. And then you cut, and then next shot, Luke's passed out, and they're kind of dragging his body near the land speeder. I always thought that kind of strange that they didn't show the whole fight and show the beginning to end. Just kind of an oddity now that I see it as an older folk. Then the wonderful crate dragon call comes as they're about to loot the speeder, and we enter Alec Guinness as the old man Ben Kenobi. To me, Guinness in this film grounds it like Liam Neeson grounds like every film he's in, these days, right? He's part of a group of actors in this film. Peter Cushing is one, and Guinness, obviously, that give this universe its gravitas, like these elders in the world that are really just striking, really good actors. And I think, and I'm just one for this kind of thing, but like, I feel like when some of these touches are done wrong, you get the wrong actors in an authoritative role, even if they're not on screen very often. You're not setting up the world well, and it becomes more and more fake, like Peter Cushing, man. Holy shit. Like, I'm scared of Peter Cushing in this movie, And even some of the guys seated around the Death Star sort of war room table, which I'll get to later. Like, one of the guys is a really good actor, and he has some great lines that he delivers. And again, Kenobi, and just these, there's a crew of really good veteran actors here locking things down. I think it's a huge deal. At some point in my life, I think I had gone back and been like, Alec Guinness is the best actor ever. And his career before Star Wars is like, he plays in a lot of comedies. He's always kind of slick and cool. He was in these smiley PBS things, which I found kind of dour and dull. I didn't really like them very much. But, he doesn't do, in his early career, like before this, nothing led up to this grave and austere. He's kind of a playful actor in a lot of his early stuff that he's known for. So this was quite a different turn for him, which It kind of sucks in a way because I'd like more of him in this kind of role. Amazing that Lucas chose him. I'm not that sure if he was his first choice, but they're talking about, Luke's telling him, there's this one part here which I love, and Luke's telling him the droid claims to be the property of an Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? And when Luke mentions the name, the camera's on Ben. The subtle facial expression change of Alec Guinness here is incredible. There's this sort of mournful John Williams music cue that comes up, and it's such a beautiful little moment. Obi-Wan, I haven't gone by that name since, before you were born. That's a name I've not heard in a long time. It's so beautiful and sad, in a way. Like, he's so great in this. So, they have to boogie out of there, and you get some nice comic relief from 3PO. So I'm done for, sir. I'm not worth it. And Luke's like, oh, come on. I get 3PO getting many good lines. We go back to Ben's hut. 3PO's kind of taken out of the scene. He asks Luke to shut down, which is kind of funny. And we get to kind of the galactic political situation, and we hear about a conflict called the Clone Wars, and we hear about Luke's father, and we find out that his dad was a Jedi Knight. And then we get the moment of truth for Star Wars fans all around the world, and Ben pulls out Anakin's old lightsaber. Oh my God. I mean, I feel like this is the seminal moment in so many childhoods. I remember a friend of mine playing around his apartment, trying to figure out how to make a lightsaber work. We were using flashlights and baby powder, shutting off all the lights, trying to figure out a way to make a beam be like a lightsaber. The coolest thing, I mean, if you could boil Star Wars down to one iconic thing, and it's all you could boil it down to, it's the lightsaber. It is the lightsaber. It represents everything to me. It's the mythology, it's the technology, it's the coolness of it, the joining this elite force of protectors, everything. And, it is a weapon battling the forces of darkness. It's just like, it's amazing, and an incredible thing that no one had come up with it before then. George was the first. But boy, what a wonderful, wonderful thing. And the sound of the saber, too. I mean, it was the thing I think, again, I will bring it up more and more, is that every time something cool in this universe is presented to us, usually comes with a sound all its own. The Imperial Star Destroyer has this amazing sound to it. R2 kind of has his own sounds. He has his beeps, and he has his when he's moving. 3PO, yes, he's an English butler, but there's something hollow about and echoey about his voice. Everywhere you go, like when you get new things in the Star Wars universe, they come with a sound. The lightsaber sound is one of the coolest sounds in the entire film. How it hums and moves and crackles. And I didn't even do any research about how it's done. It's out there. Google it. I'm sure someone will demonstrate it to you on YouTube. But the impact of it, which is what I'm really after, is amazing. So then we get the controversial, info dump about how Luke's father died. Right. And from George, we think that, Ben didn't want to tell Luke that his father is this evil, horrible guy who's been killing thousands and thousands of Jedis across the galaxy for 20 years. He didn't want to put him out. So he makes up this story about, your father was killed by a young Jedi. And I don't know. I go back and forth. Sometimes I think Lucas is full of shit, that he really meant his father to be. Because in a lot of the drafts of the earlier scripts, if you read, this script went through so many drafts, as most great things that end up being great start terribly, or just start, all over the place, and end up, just over time being drafted and redrafted. This myth of the genius artist penning something perfectly the first time through is exactly that. It's a myth. And George, worked his ass off on this script and rewrote it a dozen times. Had help. Brian De Palma helped him write the opening crawl. When De Palma came in to look at it, it was like way longer, and it was terrible. And De Palma sat down and he's like, let me write this thing for you, George. This is terrible. De Palma wrote the crawl, or edited the crawl, I should say. So, he doesn't nail everything. But I don't know. I don't know about this. It's up to you to kind of decide, basically. My instinct is that he didn't have the whole world planned out yet. And in some of the older drafts, there were two characters, and then they merged to one, and then to two, and then to one. And who knows what got left and what was not. You know what? To his credit, he made it work when he kind of, straightened it out in the next film and kept it for the rest. I don't know. Obviously, it worked out quite well. And then we get the Force, the spiritual aspect of Star Wars, which I think makes it a great movie. You have the effects, the sounds, the music, the wonderful zippy dialogue, the good versus evil, the daring do, the adventure, and you also have an undercurrent of spirituality under it, which is wonderfully expanded on in Empire and also in Jedi at the end, when he refuses to kill his father. Still a very wonderful, very Eastern philosophy type of moment, which I'll get to when I do Jedi. So then we get the wonderful soundtrack cue, the description of the Force, beautifully written. It's an energy field that binds the galaxy together, and so wonderful. He stops and rolls in, and we get Leia's full message. We hear General Kenobi, which I never kind of bought the Jedi as being generals. Doesn't make any sense to me, but whatevs. And we get the wonderful hologram technology, and then, of course, Luke's refusal of the call. Ben wants him to come, and Luke being sort of indoctrinated by his uncle. Lots of refusals, so on and so forth. Again, this is so great. And this whole scene grounds all of this in such a wonderful gravitas. Really, really, can't say enough about Alec Guinness in this. And I think in the film, too, he balances out Luke's earnest sort of farm boyness and Han and Leia's sort of wisecracking and bickering. And then you have Ben, and through when they all share the screen together, even when, it's Han and Luke and Ben, there's a wonderful balance that's achieved by all of them. So very cool. Okay, so now we get our first shot of the Death Star, and we get the immense scope right off the bat, because we see these Star Destroyers, which from the beginning of the film, we come to see as these immense, impossibly immense ships. And now they are dwarfed by this, artificial moon, as it were, artificial satellite of immense size. It's really cool, really clever way to introduce the Death Star. And I'm hoping they were there in the original film. They might have been popped in, because George just throwing ships in left and right in the remakes. So my knowledge isn't that perfect, but I'd like to think they were there. So now we get a little bit of the, McNeil hour, as George likes to do, talking heads around a table, talking politics. And we get the big drop here is the Imperial Senate has been disbanded completely. And we meet Governor Moff Tarkin, Grand Moff Tarkin, played by a Hammer horror film regular Peter Cushing, who's fantastic. Generally, I think mostly because of Cushing and another admiral in the room called Admiral Tagge, Tagge, who also has an English accent. They go back and forth about this. Tagge is like, how will the emperor maintain order without the bureaucracy, and so on and so forth. And we get a sense that, regional governors are now taking over. I think Tarkin's sort of governor of the Outer Rim territories, if I'm in my Star Wars geek mode. But so you get this great, the actor playing Tagge, this guy named Don Henderson. He's an English actor, but he's terrific. And he seems incredibly authentic as just some older admiral who kind of is questioning the authority. And there's something about the conversation between Tagge and Cushing that really makes me feel like, I don't know, it's another grounding thing in this film. The other admiral who's sort of poo-pooing the rebels, this guy Admiral Mahdi, who's sort of like, he's playing up the system, and then Vader jumps in and he's like, don't be so proud of this technological terror you constructed. And we hear Vader is also a Force acolyte as well, first time, his part of the Force, as it were. And then Mahdi goes after Vader and, basically saying, you lost the plans, buddy, who you're one to talk. And Vader does his lovely distance Force choke. It's wonderful. Everyone has great lines in this film, and Vader's line is, "I find your lack of faith disturbing." Wonderful. And I always found it when I go back to see Star Wars, it's so odd that he's under Tarkin. In all the other two films, he only reports to the Emperor. I guess he becomes kind of a special operative, tasked with destroying the rebellion. But at this point, he's sort of, Tarkin's bad boy, which is interesting how it kind of changes. So now we cut back to Tatooine. And Luke, Ben, and 3PO and R2 discover a transport that's been attacked, ostensibly by Sand People. But Ben is recognizing that it's actually the work of Imperial Stormtroopers because of sort of certain blast points, and that the tracks are side by side, not single file. It's kind of cool. Of course, then Luke realizes they would have traced the droids to Owen and Beru, and beelines for Beru. And very harsh scene here, man. I mean, I think about George trying to clean up everything. I can't believe that he's left this scene in because when Luke comes back, like obviously the stormtroopers have been to, his homestead. They've pretty much torched the place, but you see smoking skeletons of Owen and Beru Lars just lying outside one of their, house pits, I guess, whatever. And the camera lingers on them, like there they are. They're burnt skeletons. And I guess maybe George is not so shy about showing the enemy being hardcore. He doesn't want his heroes to seem mean. Who knows? But I'm glad he left it in because it's really impressive to have that there. It's a little hint of horror here, in a sci-fi spectacle, like a little hint of realism in that way. It's really cool. So then Luke heads back. He's basically, his kind of decision has been made for him. He's going to go with Ben to Alderaan, and he's going to sort of apprentice to be a Jedi. We cut back to the Death Star again. This time we cut to Leia's cell, and we see this really creepy torture droid, which again, for Star Wars, like, I guess there was some torture in Empire as well, but she's this creepy floating ball with a syringe moving towards her. And it's a great little setup scene that she's in danger, and will need to be helped by someone. Could anyone get in to the Death Star? And the detention center is great. I mean, just it's all like clanking, metal floors and these black, flat black cells. Just really, really great sort of, Kafka-esque type of unsettling detention center. I really like it. So now we move into Mos Eisley, and we have Ben's first wonderful quote, "You won't ever find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy," which I love. And what I love about the Mos Eisley stuff is that, the stormtroopers their pristine white battle armor, which we've seen, is now all grimy and dirty because they're running ops on Tatooine. I like that they made the stormtroopers dirty and grimy, and that their armor is all like dusted up from being on Tatooine. I think if you would have continued to keep them pristine, I think it would have been an odd thing visually. So, and we see certain stormtroopers have certain rank epaulets, like these big red epaulets on one arm or another. I guess they are like the sergeants or captains or whoever they are. But it's kind of cool. So you see a little bit of a hierarchy because obviously their white uniforms are so uniform. Who the hell's in charge? We get the first wonderful Jedi mind trick that Ben plays on the Stormtrooper, which is awesome. And then the cantina, which is just, to me, Ben and the Force and the Jedi, kind of the spiritual center of Star Wars and the gravity that they hold, right? I think the cantina is really the center of the kind of the fun that George has in this universe too, and that we have with him, that it's a swing, they're playing swing-oriented music, and all the different aliens inside. And again, like when the droids were in the transporter and you saw all different droids, giving them context, now you're really given a preparation for. It's a pretty big galaxy that they live in. There's a lot of different species. This is not Earth. It's not just a desert on Earth. This is a huge galaxy with all kinds of different species of creature. And this is our first walk into that, which is neat. I mean, it's a little dated for sure. Some of the creatures just have kind of like on, nice latex helmets, but it's not terrible. And the music is great. I mean, it's just so goofy and fun. And I love the band shots, like the bug-like aliens playing the wind instruments and bopping along. It's just hysterical. It's classic. I love the one alien that's kind of got the flat, it's almost like a manta ray, flat-faced alien. It's really cool. There's just really odd-looking ones there. Some of them still work. Some of them are definitely dated, like I said, but. Then we get our first shot of Chewbacca. It's kind of a wordless shot between him and Ben. They're chit-chatting about, something. The droids get kicked out because they're not allowed in the bar. And this never made much sense to me. Like, the droids are the most important part of their whole party. Like, they contain the most vital information. And they're doing all this basically to get the droids back to Alderaan. And but the bar owner says that they're not allowed. And so Luke is like, guys, can you wait outside where all the stormtroopers are going house to house looking for you? Yeah, it'll be fine. I don't know. I always thought that was an odd kind of choice. Then we get the Ben Kenobi bar saber move. We finally get to see a lightsaber in action. These two goons who are sort of threatening Luke, and Ben pulls his move, cuts the guy's arm off, and there's this great shot of Ben, like right after he cuts the dude's arm off, where he just stands there holding his saber, and it's very cool. It's very like cinematic of like, he's a bad dude. It made me think of Lucas channeling Toshiro Mifune, in Kurosawa's Western epics. Very much, I think, indebted, but its own. This is Guinness is his own character here, and it's really amazing. I like that they cut to the bloody arm, the severed arm holding the blaster, so that the guy actually did pull a gun on him. And then, introduction to one of our favorite characters, right? Han Solo. I love that the way this is shot, the light comes from sort of that light sitting on the table. Gives off this kind of cool glow to their faces. It makes it seem kind of like, I guess it's George's sort of film noir fob, as it were. The great conversation, and immediately Han is awesome and laconic, and Harrison Ford just, lanky and cool, and we want to be him, from the first minute. And the back and forth, and Luke is definitely in a subordinate role here. Ben is in control. I'm going to give him 15 grand instead of 10, but can only give him 2 now. Completely maneuvers him into taking them, and it's great that Ben kind of owns the scene. And then they leave, and Greedo arrives. Look, we all know what happened with this scene, what George did with it. It's a travesty. This scene belongs to, the Star Wars that's now lost for me, that I can't even access anymore. But the fact that Han shoots first and gets the drop on Greedo, who's dumb enough to let Han hide his gun hand, is the thing. It's part of who Solo is. He's a bit of a scoundrel. He's not a make-pretend scoundrel. He is a scoundrel. This whole rethinking of this scene by George is probably the worst affront that he's perpetrated on Star Wars fandom. Look, it's his stuff, right? He owns it. He can do what the hell he wants with it. But it's a wonderful example of when a creator still wants to control how other people process their work and not just let go, let these movies stand on their own. And that amount of control, really the reason why the 3 prequels failed utterly, because George's control in the films was so complete that they were airless, dead movies from the minute the camera started rolling. Sith tunneled out from that a little bit. There was some organic good stuff in Sith, but because of this same idea where he needs to control every part, like, his art can't just breathe and live and be spontaneous, to me is the the complexity of George, and what's arguably maybe the best movie of the trilogy, right? Empire. He didn't even direct. Won't dwell on it too much longer, but it is what it is. In its original form, it's an awesome scene. Yes, I bet you have. Bang, Greedo's down. I love the capper of hand throwing money to the bartender. Sorry about the mess, just the coolest character. He's like he's like a gunfighter, man. Like, goddamn, who is this guy, So great. Then a brief cut back to the Death Star. We find out that Leia has resisted the mind probe. So Tarkin cooks up this despicable idea of threatening her with the destruction of her home planet. Plot-wise, it also puts the Death Star near our heroes because they're trying to get there as well. So very clever in hindsight, when I think about it. Then we see the Falcon for the first time, and we're keeping to our grimy sci-fi future. The Falcon, man, what a piece of junk. It's awesome. And it's such an odd shape for a ship. I remember the first time I saw it, and I had a small metal replica of it as a kid. I think on hindsight, it's sort of a saucer with, a directionalist type of piece put on it and a little cockpit slapped on the side. At the end of the day, but I think at first blush, like, what a weird looking ship, because when I was a kid, I didn't pick it up that it was like just an offshoot of a flying saucer. It just looked weird and boxy. It, definitely the ships in the Star Wars universe, the great thing about them is they do all share a certain design sensibility, which I think is really cool. There's something about the boxy front of the Falcon, which reminds us of the boxy front of the Star Destroyers. Not they're made by the same company, but there is a design similarity in a lot of these things that I love. It's just what a cool ship. It does look like a hunk of junk. It's dirty and streaked, and and obviously we'll see more and more. Han talks to it later on that it's barely holding together. So we get our brief skirmish with the stormtroopers, and the ship blasts out, and I love the sound. Again, the sound design in this film, the sound of the Falcon taking off is so beautiful. Just this low roar and whoosh. And the shot of her leaving Mos Eisley is just so cool. You just cut to a camera like in the city, and the Falcon sort of blasts out, and it has that, that white bar. And, instead of what we're used to in sci-fi and even regular science as exhaust ports for ships, it's just a white bar behind it. Then we get another wonderful shot as it enters orbit in Tatooine. Tatooine sort of hanging above it, and then sort of the 4 Star Destroyers vectoring in to overtake it. Then the wonderful back and forth as Han is sort of computing their hyperspace jump, and the ships are gaining, and you're going to find yourself floating home. Great banter. And then we get our first instance of the sort of streaking stars as they jump into hyperspace, and they're off. And then we get the Alderaan destruction. Leia is threatened by Tarkin, backs her up into Vader, and she has an English accent for a little bit here, and then it's gone. The way the Death Star fires is so cool, how the sort of surrounding lasers all kind of converge and make the one larger piece. It's so cool. It doesn't make any sense in terms of physics and optics, but damn, it's cool. And to destroy an entire planet, in a sense, I think it was too much for me the first time I saw it. The fact that this little moon, has the power to sort of blow up an entire planet in the space of seconds. It's pretty incredible. I mean, in terms of doomsday secret weapons, in any kind of sci-fi universe, Death Star, I think, rates pretty high, man. It's a pretty unbelievable weapon. So now we cut to the interior of the Falcon. Ben is sort of supervising Luke's lightsaber training, and it's almost like he's been physically impacted through the Force by all the billions that died on Alderaan, and he has to sit down. But he kind of poo-poos it, and he tells Luke to get on with his lesson. And then we get R2 playing Chewbacca and some kind of cool chess, where the characters are these 3D little monsters that kill each other. Let the Wookiee win, obviously, awesome. Then we get a little more of, Ben sort of coaching Luke with the Force, and we get Han's sort of, his little speech for his character. Ain't no, kid, I've been through one side of the galaxy to the other. I never seen anything. It's great. It's Han, we love it. Obviously, the blast shield sequence, which I love, right? I mean, it just plays into the spiritual aspects of the Force. And it is a really cool way it's done in that, Luke reacts those last 2 shots that the remote hits at him. And, there's the remote. It's a casual piece of sci-fi tech that's so cool and not even remarked on in the film. And this is the great part about science fiction that I love, is that you can just have like a repulsor, drone to train with. You can just have one in the film, and no one and it's like an amazing piece of technology that couldn't exist here, and it's just there, and Luke is training with it. I think it's little moments like that slip into our subconscious as we watch the movie, and it informs and broadens the universe that they're in, that this device can exist in that way, that it's so casual. And we get Ben's wonderful line, "You've taken your first step into a larger world." Then, coming out of hyperspace, Alderaan is basically a meteor shower at this point. It's destroyed. TIE fighter overshoots them. The Falcon sort of jumps forward to try to catch it, which is kind of a coolly shot scene. What I like about this scene is as the Falcon is sort of entering the Death Star, you really get a sense of the scale of the thing, because you're seeing it from afar from the Falcon's cockpit, and then, at the very end, the Falcon is sort of entering the docking bay, the scale of the docking bay versus the rest of the Death Star. And it's incredible how large the bloody thing is and how large we can feel that it is via how things are shot. And I love how the Falcon enters the docking bay, because the camera is sort of situated right in front of the Falcon, and the camera is moving backwards as the Falcon comes forward. And then we see the outline of sort of the magnetic field bay as the Falcon comes through it, and it's just, I think it's unremarked on, but I think it's a very subtle and really cool shot as the Falcon comes to rest. So then we get, the kind of creepy Vader shows up, and the Imperial officer tells him that, according to the log, the crew abandoned ship right for takeoff, so on and so forth. And we get this nice, "I sense something, a presence I've not felt since." Ben can't disguise his Force sensitivity and that it affects Vader. That's really cool, actually. I've always loved that. They overpower the guards and get into uniform, and they sneak into this overarching sort of control office, as it were. They plug in R2 to sort of interpret what Kenobi says, the entire Imperial network. And I love that R2 plugging in is very much like old style computers used to work. You know what I mean? Like, he plugs in, and it's weird, like these half turns back and forth that we used to see in old documentaries or photographs of like how computer tape drives used to run. I find that immensely amusing, as incredibly dated as it is, but I never mind it really. You get a bit of the mission. Ben finds out where the tractor beam controls are. he basically tells Luke, I got to go alone. Your destiny lies along a different path than mine. Great parting words for the two. The Force will be with you always. Wonderful grave delivery as Guinness. Warm and wonderful in this film. Right after he leaves, of course, R2 finds Leia, and there's this great back and forth. Han, better her than me. She's rich. Love the line. Luke is like, more wealth than you can imagine. I can imagine quite a bit. You'll get it. I better. So the idea is to treat Chewbacca as if he's a prisoner and bring him to the detention center where Leia is being held. And I love when they get there, they're facing the wrong way and have to turn around. It's very funny. Of course, he gets loose. They take over the area. Luke runs to get Leia. I love Han's conversation with Control. Situation normal. We're fine now. Fine, good. How are you? Great Han moment, as it were. And then we have Luke and Leia meeting brother and sister for the first time since they were children. Ben Kenobi, she jumps out. And of course, at that moment, the Imperials have arrived. I love Leia. She's a great character, a great female character in this film. She takes control immediately, and she's cranky and bickering with Han right off the bat. This is some rescue. Didn't you have a plan for getting out? He's the brain sweetheart. The lines are just so good, man. It's, they're back and forth without being overly stupid and overly cutesy. It's just good, solid action adventure, wisecracking dialogue, and in the midst of a firefight, it's great. And she grabs a weapon and blows a hole in the garbage chute, and it's her plan to escape. She saves them basically, which I love. Into the garbage chute fly boys, her line, which is awesome. I mean, all the wisecracking in this is just so spot on when she enters, and the chemistry between her and Han is just so perfect. I think he got lucky with casting, frankly, and and the script is great. So together, it makes for just a great experience to watch them. Just as a quick aside, it's like why I think the middle trilogy works. Less so in Jedi than the first two films. It's funny. The lines are funny. Han and Leia going back and forth. I like nice men. I am nice men. I'd soon kiss a Wookiee. I can arrange that. It's actually funny stuff. The prequel trilogies was just so dreary, and the humor was so droll and terrible, and like some old uncle humoring an extremely young child. You know what I mean? This is funny stuff, and it's still funny now. It's still the wisecracks back and forth. Get this walking carpet out of my way. And then the trash compactor, which I always think is George, is so old-fashioned in his situations. In later Star Wars films, having these giant creatures having to be fought, which belong in like a Edgar Rice Burroughs kind of novel, like a Princess of Mars in a sense. And he loves all that stuff. So this is very Perils of Pauline. They're stuck in a trash compactor, and Luke being taken away by the weird sort of serpent creature. It's cool. It is what it is. It's funny. There's some good tension because 3PO and R2 are basically busted at that point, and they escape, and they finally turn on the comlink. Some solid tension there. Really good. We cut to Ben shutting down the tractor beams, which is great. Very quiet scenes. And we get this wonderful design, the impossible size of the station, because when Ben's kind of walking around, there are all these bridges connecting certain stations, and the depths, you fall in one of these bloody things, man. You're going to fall forever, it's so huge. We cut back now to Luke, Han, and Chewie. And they've escaped the trash compactor, but they've run into stormtroopers, and Han runs after them in his great crazy moment. And of course, they hit a dead end and turn around. And Luke has the one moment where he swings Leia across the abyss, very, very Errol Flynn, as it were. It's cool. We're in action adventure territory now. They're both trying to escape to get back to the ship. It's fun. And then we get Ben versus Vader. Vader's waiting for him, knows he's going to try to make his way back to the Falcon, is blocking him. We have our very first lightsaber duel. And I've got in an earlier podcast, I covered all of the lightsaber duels in the all six at the moment, all 6 Star Wars films, and ranked them and talked very much in depth about them. And this one I don't rate very highly because they just got better after this one. But it is what it is. I mean, my God, we see, first of all, seeing Vader's red saber, getting a sense that, lightsabers and Jedi, they have their opposites in color as well as philosophy. So I won't say too much about the saber battle. It's not a great athletic battle. It's a battle between, a scarred man in a machine suit, and a very older gentleman. There's some nice moves here and there. There's definitely, it's great when the sabers come together and they crackle, trying to override each other, and there's a few moments where a saber will hit a wall behind a character, so you get a sense that, these things are really there. It's not super fantasy. And then, of course, Ben sees Luke and smiles and, raises his saber up and prepares himself for his journey. And Vader kills his body, I guess I should say. Luke kind of loses it. It's a nice moment. I mean, it's kind of to see Ben die so quickly. I mean, we just met the guy. He's gone, And we also hear that Ben is in Luke's head in some way because Luke won't tear himself away from killing stormtroopers. And we hear Ben, "Run, Luke, run." And so somehow Ben has transcended death in some way that we won't learn about for quite a while in the Star Wars universe, but it has happened. Tractor beam has been taken out. The Falcon escapes. Because there's a homing beacon on the ship, obviously there are only 4 TIE fighters sent out in pursuit. While Chewie steers the ship, we get a wonderful sort of World War II bomber aerial battle, where Luke and Han are in sort of the belly guns, and they're fighting only 4 TIE fighters. And it's pretty cool. I love that Han wears gloves when he does this. I feel like it gives it such like it's just a little nudge of authenticity. Like either they're his flying gloves or, they're his gunner gloves. But either way, like he just looks a little cooler with the gloves on, and I noticed this time. And it's a lot of fun. The effects for their time were great. I mean, the sort of double checkerboards that they were using to track the TIE fighters and the wonderful sound of the TIE fighters. This sort of tube screamer, if you're a musician at all and play guitar, this tube screamer sound of the TIE fighters, they're nasty sounding and really cool looking ships. Really always appreciated the TIE fighters, big time. We see R2 and his many things that he can do. He's like a rolling Swiss Army knife. There's a fire in the Falcon, and, he has anti-fire equipment on him, and he puts it out. Just kind of great. I'll say this, and I'll say a lot more about it very soon, because these are all models being used. Man, the TIE fighters look very substantial, as does the Falcon. And I love how when they film Han or Luke at the guns and the camera's facing out, you see, the sort of the gun outside the ship right there, and they really built it. Between the reality of the models and the reality of the guns, like it makes this look like these are real vehicles. And so far, there hasn't been a moment in this film where I felt that, ship-wise, that we've been anything but completely substantial and incredibly tactile. Everything looks and feels really amazing. This little battle definitely was an example, I think. So now we're back at the Rebel base, and we see X-Wing and Y-Wing fighters littered throughout the hangar. Our first introduction to the Incon T-65 X-Wing fighter, which is just the coolest ship ever. I love in the Lucas world, they do the fighters by letters, right? Y-Wings, B-Wings, A-Wings, so on and so forth. Like, it's all very cool. I don't know if they went too much further than that, but because the ships themselves are shaped in the shape of the letter that they represent, which is great. Definitely very 70s sort of James Bond lair-ish in the Rebel base, for sure. I always say that when there's like golf carts with people in white coats. As soon as I see golf carts with technicians, I'm like, it's a Bond movie. And there was a lot of that in the 70s, the lairs of the bad guys. There were always these golf carts and technicians running around, doing some massive project. So I always felt that a lot of this was very, Bond villain-ish in a way. But the temple is really cool. I don't know where they shot that temple, probably somewhere in Southeast Asia, I would gather. The temple is really cool. They have this, high-tech Rebel base inside this massive stone temple. It's really neat. We get right to the speech about the battle, which is great, I think. They move right to it. And we get the animatics about how this is going to happen, which is very cool. The whole trench idea, the small exhaust port that they have to hit, proton torpedoes, whatever the hell that means. And Luke's smarmy, I always think it's a smug line, like, it's not impossible. I used to bullseye womp rats. In the novel, Alan Dean Foster wrote the novel, and Lucas co-wrote it or edited it. In the novel, Wedge answers him back by saying, did those womp rats have energy rifles, and were they shooting back at you when you bullseyed them? Which I always thought was a great riposte to Luke's thing, but he doesn't have an answer in the film. But I don't know, it's just kind of a little bit of uber trivia, which I think is kind of fun. So a little bit of trivia about sort of George's inspiration for the trench run battle. There are 2 films that are often cited. The first one's called The Dam Busters, and The Dam Busters is about a real-life Allied bombing attack on a German dam. The whole idea in the war was that this dam was on a river. The Germans had put torpedo nets in the river. So if you were flying over the river, in an airplane and you dropped a torpedo, the nets would stop it far from the dam. So what British intelligence had to devise is a torpedo that skipped over the top of the water and then was able to impact the dam. And in order to do this, they needed to have planes fly very low in sort of, the narrow river valley. And when they got in a certain distance from the dam, release the bomb, and the bomb would impact the water at a certain speed in a certain way and would skip over the waves like you were skimming a stone. Then it would clunk into the dam, activating a time delay fuse, and then once the torpedo sunk to the bottom of the dam, it would explode and take the dam out, which is just ridiculously cool. If you see some of this film, you do get a sense of, at the very least, what is directly taken from is the device that the pilots had to use to tell them they were close enough to the dam to release the bomb. Very much the device that the X-Wing pilots use to get when they're getting close to the thermal exhaust port to guide them in. But actually, there's another film called 633 Squadron that, if you watch this film, you can tell that George actually framed the entire last battle around this last battle in this film. And in this film, it's sort of a composite based on some historical accuracy, but I think the actual idea of this film is not historical. But that there is a German town or a German base that is protected underneath sort of an overhanging rock outcrop. It can't be, gotten, kind of like Guns of Navarone-ish, if you will. So these, de Havilland Mosquito bombers have to fly through like a river, a set of canyons to get in position, and then they're dropping bombs on top of this rock outcropping in order to collapse it and collapse the rock itself on the base. But if you see the film, oh my God, Lucas took all of it. He took the opening speech. There's this like model of the rock canyons and the guy explaining how the guys are going to get down it. There's the takeoff of the planes, and through the canyons, they're being assaulted by anti-aircraft guns from below and then enemy fighters from above. And it's exactly, Lucas stole from a good film, but it is the 633 Squadron's ending sequence. So it's still trivia there. Han, true to his character, is like he got his reward. Earlier in the Falcon, post winning the TIE Fighter battle, there was some wonderful chemistry between him and Leia. Definitely effortless between the two, where he was like, I'm not in this for your revolution, and I'm only in it for the money. I expect to be well paid. And she's like, you will be amply rewarded. But she's disappointed in him and angry. And this is the payoff for that. Obviously, he's loading these huge pallets of money on his to his ship. Luke's kind of pissed at him, and Han's like, why don't you come with us? You're like a good fighter. We could use you. Luke kind of puts the seed in him. This reminded me of so much in The Dark Knight Rises when he allows Catwoman the means to escape the city and then leaves her alone, and she returns. Like, it's such a Han Solo moment, and the Han Solo moment was born, definitely, and that comes in a little bit. But what's great about the prelude before they launch is the realism of the ships. The X-Wings are filthy, man. What you sense is these are real ships that have seen real battles. They're grimy. They haven't got a chance to be cleaned. The TIE fighters of the Empire are spotless because, they got cash. What can I tell you? They have more money than the rebels. They can afford, TIE fighter washing stations. And but the X-Wings, they're hustled from ad hoc base to ad hoc base. No time to clean them. And they look great up close. And even in the cockpit, when Luke sits down, all the dials and readouts that are surrounding him, I don't think I could hazard a freeze frame, very close look, but for when the movie leaves them on the screen, it looks like a real cockpit, very akin to a jet fighter, as it were. And then he requests R2 as his sort of R2 unit, which all the X-Wings have, behind the pilot as sort of their counterparts, as it were, to help them, which I think is kind of cool. So then we have the final battle, which is just, it's so great. And I love the count off. Red 5 standing by, Red 2, Red 6. The great S-foils into attack position scene. All the X-Wings open up their wings, and we know why now they're X-Wing fighters. And I love, this. What's great about the battle, one small detail that I love, is what they do with the voices. They use all kinds of vocal effects on the voices. It sounds like these Doppler shifted voices. Cut the chatter, Red 2, and it gives it such sense of realism. I don't think they use that vocal trick ever again in the Star Wars universe, not in the sequels and not in the prequels. Like only in this battle, and it's used over and over again, even later in the battle when they're communicating with each other. You're hearing the voice through this sort of Doppler shift, which gives it like an incredible sense of realism. That this is like a jet squadron fighting over Korea or something, And always thought that was really impressive and wish that they would have continued that, because it gives the battle a wonderful realism that I don't think any other battle in the Star Wars universe can live up to. How this is shot, how realistic things look to a certain degree, and I'll get to that briefly. But to me, it's my favorite star battle of the entire 6 films. Why I think this is my favorite battle is because it has a shape. There's a shape to the battle. The initial onslaught is the rebels kind of showing up to the Death Star. They're so small, they're evading the big guns that the Death Star has because it's planning for major assaults by huge ships, not little ships. So they have the run of the place, for the first third of the battle. Then the second third is them fending off the TIE fighters and dealing with the TIE fighter threat. So it's escalated a little bit. And then you have the trench runs, which is the second, the other escalation where, these ships have to drop down. And once a ship, goes into a trench run, it escalates the tension because they can't maneuver very well in the trenches. So they have to be covered. And if TIE fighters drop in behind them, it's only a matter of time until they catch up and knock them out. And then there's the tension of, did the shots go in? So all of this combines to give this battle an incredible shape, and the rebels are decimated. They're just killed off. They barely succeed. I know it gives this battle an urgency and a shape. And once I've seen, a lot of ships blowing up a lot of other ships, and I get a little bit of fatigue, they instantly escalate or move on to a different phase of the battle, and I think it's genius. Again, I think why this battle works so well is that all the ships are models, and all you see is close-ups of the pilots in their cockpits. And when you're looking in the cockpit, you're seeing the real ship in a sense around them. You're looking through the cockpit, seeing the wings of certain ships and the backs of ships, and you're seeing the pilot themselves. And it's all very realistic. And then you're shooting from a little ways away where you don't see the pilot, but you see the ship. The model itself is present and there, and it's very realistic. Because there are no halfway shots where you see, in subsequent films, they were able to put these little digital pilots in these ships. So you got kind of a halfway shot where you saw, an actor giving dialogue while you saw the ship too. Once that happened, it's just the cartoony quality of how you had to do the CGI ship. It was not the same. I'm not going to criticize it, but it just wasn't as amazing as this was. Because nowhere in this battle do I ever get the sense that in later battles where there's a gazillion ships and they're all fighting each other. And I know George loved to do that in later films. He would pit, hundreds of X, A, and B wings against, hundreds of TIE fighters and TIE bombers. And in that one moment, it's impressive as a spectacle, but you actually have to have the battle, And once you get down to the battle, it's just a couple of ships at a time. And the more real they look, the better I think the battle is, or the more enjoyable it is. And then, of course, you have, the genius of Vader joining the fight, and that Vader's ship is different. He has an advanced TIE with the sort of the folded-in wings. So, it's Vader's TIE fighter. So of all the ships as they're fighting, it's Vader. It's just very subtle, but very, very smart, and instantly you know where he is at each time in the fight. So then, eventually the battle leads up to the first trench run. The great voices in various states of filterings again, and, stay on target. The wonderful targeting machines that the lead pilots use to drop, and, how the sort of the meters kind of count off backwards and it gets closer, really intense tension. Switch to targeting computer. And everyone has a different kind of voice, and I don't know, it's so great. The Rebellion is such a fun group of guys, when you hear them talking on the Porkins, who blows up, and a Red Leader eventually, who's gets killed, and eventually you're down to Luke, Wedge, and Biggs. I think there are other fighters around, but they've pretty much been decimated. And it's up to Luke, and finally our hero is going to get his day, and we're going in full throttle, and you see, the ship's coming in out of the sun, and it's incredibly rousing, what a dramatic escalation. It's amazing. And then Luke's in the trench. Wedge gets hit, he has to cut loose, and then it's him and Biggs. Biggs is running interference, and, if you knew a little bit more about him and Biggs being childhood friends, there's a little more at stake when Biggs gets killed, but Biggs gives his life for Luke. There's the great great moment, when Luke switches off his targeting computer and he's going to use the Force, because Ben kind of comes to him in that moment and tells him to just let go, let the Force guide you, and you'll be fine. And also you get the wonderful war room scene back on the fourth moon of Yavin, where Leia and General Dodonna, they're all sitting there watching the great animatics of the Death Star clearing the main sun of Yavin. It has to orbit the sun until it gets in an actually clear firing range, and it's shown very detailed on the map, and it's really cool, and you can actually visualize how close they're getting. And then there are, various cutbacks in the Death Star as one of the Imperial guys has analyzed the attack. And he goes up to Tarkin and he's like, there is danger. Should I have your ship standing by? And of course, Tarkin is, are you crazy? It's our moment of triumph. And then the Han scene, which is so great. And what's cool about it in a way is that you don't see the Millennium Falcon. Vader locks in on Luke after, mentioning the Force is strong with this one, which is kind of cool. When he's about to fire on Luke, the two ships behind him destroyed and his starts to spin out. The first shot you get is Han in the cockpit of the Falcon, like, you're all clear, kid, now let's blow this thing and go home. You don't see the Falcon, and I don't know. There's something about that I always wonder, like, if you would have seen the Falcon, would have had as much impact as if you would have seen Han, just Han, because you just see Han straight up, it's one of the great, most rousing and emotional rescue scenes in cinema, right? I mean, my God, it's been stolen for 1,000 movies. And you can watch Star Wars a dozen times, and it never ceases to throw goosebumps on my arms. And of course, with the aid of the Force, Luke drops the proton torpedoes in the thermal exhaust port. The wonderful explosion as, several ships. Then we see the Falcon, taking off, getting distance between the Death Star and blows it up. Wonderfully satisfying end to the film. Back at Rebel headquarters, this wonderful medal scene in the temple where they're all lined up to give medals to Han, Chewbacca, and Luke. And it's amazing. The John Williams score. R2 had gotten hit in the trench run, which was kind of a sour moment, during the last battle. He's good as new. 3PO is all burnished gold. They've been sort of refurbed, as it were. It's just so emotional. It ends. My God, who knew what was going to happen after this film? It was such a satisfying climax. And so what to say about this film? I mean, I think just to recap briefly, what I think still works in this film, what to me contributes to it being a special film. And I say special film in that there's something about this film that transcends its time, that you can still watch it now, even with the anachronistic things that you see. But I think there are a lot of subtle things that go into why it's special. And I think some of the things are, first of all, John Williams is a huge, huge factor in this film. And I think if you just watch Star Wars without a lot of music or different kind of music underneath that was not as rousing or as elementally melodic as Williams is, you got a different movie, I think it's so incredible. The themes that Williams wrote for this film are like, oh my God, has he ever written better? It's incredible. And the sound design. I know this sounds kind of goofy, but, such care was taken to get things to just sound very realistic, from the lightsaber to the Star Destroyer to even when the Death Star is firing, boom, there are these just all kinds of different sounds, the Doppler shift effect on the voices of the rebels as they're attacking. So much goes into the sound in this film. It was, to me, groundbreaking. And I think they won a lot of technical awards that year. I think Rocky won Best Picture, but I think, my God, what they did, Lucas sound, obviously, right? What he did to the history of cinema sound is incalculable, his impact, this film's impact. I think the shape of the end battle works. The dialogue is, still terrific and fun. The spiritual aspects, so you have an action adventure with really solid, funny dialogue, and alongside it, you have a very grave and deep message of the Force and the spiritual aspect of this universe, hand in hand. In a sense, Kenobi balancing Han Solo and Leia. Just incredible. And you had, wonderful casting. I mean, I think you could have cast a lot of actors as Luke and you would have been fine. But Carrie Fisher is incredibly winning and present in this. When I look at the prequels and when I see Natalie Portman in the prequels, she didn't have like an eighth of the charm that Carrie Fisher had. I mean, there was something alive about Carrie Fisher in her eyes and the way she spoke and how she moved. She was incredibly alive and wonderfully just potent in this film, and I think that's, again, I don't know that a lot of actresses would have pulled off what she pulled off. I think it was amazing. And obviously Guinness and Cushing and the genius of James Earl Jones as Vader, So it's just so many things working together. And besides the groundbreaking special effects, I mean, that's not even to mention the ship designs and all the special effects and the things that he had to create whole cloth for this film, and the care that went into the design of all the ships and all the devices and the blasters and everything. Just incredible. I mean, just an incredible thing. And, the film doesn't need me to champion it at all. It's really wonderful to go back to this film and to understand more as an adult, like why it works. And it works because of cinematic techniques, not because it's a gee whiz sci-fi romp, but there are real cinematic techniques that are used in this film that they're so layered in. You don't even know they're there, except that something special has just happened in the 2 hours that you've allowed yourself to open to the film. Just a miracle of a movie. I don't think can be overpraised enough in terms of impact as a cinematic experience. And I think I'll stop there. So that ends this episode of Sci-Fi on Screen, Star Wars. I want to thank everyone for listening. I was really trepidatious recording this one. This is such a time-hallowed property, and I hope I at least conveyed my enthusiasm about what Star Wars means to me, what it meant to me, what it still continues to mean to me as I, age, hopefully gracefully. You can find Sci-Fi on Screen on Facebook. We are at sci-fionscreen.com. We are on iTunes as well. And you can subscribe to us on iTunes, and you can subscribe via your smartphone. You can search. A lot of smartphones now are coming with, prepackaged podcast apps. Jump into that app and you can search for Sci-Fi on Screen and subscribe. And each week as an episode is uploaded, you'll automatically get it downloaded to your device. So there's that. Again, thank you all very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.